He was a modern man, a father who believed in raising his child with ambition, curiosity, and open-mindedness. In his home, love was expressed in the form of providing comfort, planning vacations, and building a future. Religion, though respected from a distance, was never central. It was something from his past. Cultural, historical, sometimes poetic, but never deeply personal. So when he asked his young son, "What does love mean to you?" it was more out of curiosity than expectation. He assumed the boy would say, "Mama," or maybe ice cream, or my favorite toy. But what came instead was a single word, a name, a legacy. Muhammad, peace be upon him. The room went still. The television in the background, the buzz of notifications from his phone, all of it faded for a moment. He blinked. "What did you say?" he asked, unsure if he'd heard it right. The boy repeated with calm confidence, "Love means Muhammad, peace be upon him." The father sat up, his heart strangely moved. "Why do you say that?" The boy didn't hesitate, because he loved people who didn't love him. He forgave those who hurt him. He helped the poor. He was kind to animals. He smiled at everyone. He prayed for us, even though he never met us. The father looked into his child's eyes and saw something he couldn't explain, something pure, deep, and unshaken. It wasn't something he had taught his son. It wasn't something they watched on TV. It was something far more real, more lasting, and it came from a place of light the father had forgotten in his own life. All his years chasing success, praise, and comfort had never brought him the peace that this one name had brought into his child's heart. That night, as his son fell asleep peacefully, the father sat alone in silence. The name Muhammad, peace be upon him, echoed in his mind, not as a historical figure, not as part of a distant religion, but as the living definition of love. A love that was patient, that endured hardship, that sacrificed for others. A love that wasn't about receiving, but about giving, endlessly, gently, sincerely. He opened his phone and began to search, not for facts or debates, but for stories. Stories of the Prophet's life, his kindness, his truthfulness, his pain, his prayers. And as he read, he felt something crack inside him, a wall that had been standing for years, built from pride, doubt, distraction, slowly began to fall. He wept that night, quietly, not because he felt ashamed, but because he felt found. In the days that followed, everything began to shift. The father started talking less and listening more. He became gentler, more reflective, more present. He asked more questions, not to the world, but to his own soul. And with every new story he read about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he found pieces of himself he thought he'd lost forever. The moment he asked his son what love meant, he was looking for something simple. But what he got was something sacred. A reminder that love isn't a word or a feeling. It's a legacy. And the greatest legacy of love this world has ever known is the man whose name lives in the hearts of children, even when the world forgets. Muhammad, peace be upon him. That child's answer didn't just define love, it rekindled it. It awakened a sleeping heart. And it began a journey back to the source of all mercy, a journey lit by the pure love of a prophet who never stopped caring, even for those who never knew him. A child's heart is one of the purest things in this world. It is free from prejudice, pride, and the complications that cloud adult minds. When the father casually asked his young son what love meant to him, he expected an answer shaped by cartoons or toys, something playful or sweet, but what he received was something profound. Love means Muhammad, peace be upon him. In that single sentence, the child unknowingly opened a door, to his father's heart. This simple yet powerful statement wasn't based on deep study or long sermons. It came from a place of fitra, the natural inclination within every human being to recognize truth, beauty, and goodness. And there is no greater example of love and mercy than the Prophet Muhammad. The child had likely heard stories about the Prophet's kindness, his forgiveness of enemies, his care for the poor, and his gentle nature. These stories, even when shared briefly or casually, left a lasting imprint on his young heart. Unlike adults who often overthink or resist change, children absorb what touches their soul without resistance. And what touched this child was the character of a man who lived over 1,400 years ago, yet whose love still reaches across time. For the child, love wasn't just about emotions, it was about action. It was about a man who cried for people he never met, who forgave those who stoned him, who fed the hungry and stood for the weak. This was love in its purest, most selfless form. The father, on the other hand, had spent years chasing temporary definitions of love. He saw love in material success, in relationships that didn't last, and comforts that always faded. But hearing his son speak of love in the form of the Prophet's name caused something inside him to awaken. He realized that love wasn't just a feeling, it was a way of being. It was truth, compassion, sacrifice, and sincerity. And in that moment, his child became his teacher. That small sentence was not just an innocent reply, it was a divine reminder, a spark that ignited a journey back to the one whose entire life embodied mercy. The purity of a child's heart became the mirror through which the father saw real love. Muhammad, peace be upon him, he always wanted to be a good father, present, supportive, and inspiring. He worked hard, provided comfort, and planned for his child's future. But somewhere along the way, he forgot to talk about the deeper things: meaning, purpose, character, and faith. Their home was filled with laughter, entertainment, and ambition, but the name of Muhammad, peace be upon him, had rarely, if ever, been mentioned. That's why when his son looked at him with innocent eyes and said, "I want to be like Muhammad, peace be upon him," it struck him deeply. This wasn't something the father had intentionally taught. The name wasn't part of their everyday conversations, yet it had found a place in the child's heart. The father was surprised, curious, and even a bit shaken. He asked his son, "Why do you want to be like him?" And the answer was simple: because he was good to everyone, he never lied, and Allah loved him. The father was moved in a way he hadn't been for years. His son had found his hero, not in a movie, a cartoon, or a celebrity, but in the man who was the most beloved to Allah, the seal of prophets, the mercy to all creation. That night, the father stayed awake longer than usual, thinking about how he had missed out on such a powerful example in his own life. If his child saw something beautiful in the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, then surely there was something real and deep that he needed to explore himself. He started reading, not long books or scholarly debates, but simple stories. He read about the Prophet's patience with those who mocked him, his care for the poor, the way he treated orphans, his respect for women, and the gentle way he corrected people's mistakes. Each story felt like a light turning on in a dark room. He began to notice how impatient he had become in his own life, how distracted he was from real connection. And slowly, he started changing. He turned the television off earlier. He asked his son about what he'd learned. He started praying, not perfectly, but sincerely. And with every step, he was guided by the same light his son had seen, the example of Muhammad, peace be upon him. The boy's desire to be like the Prophet became the path that transformed his father's life. The quiet, unspoken influence of the Prophet Muhammad often works in subtle yet profound ways, like sunlight filtering through leaves, touching hearts even when his name isn't directly mentioned. Many grow up in homes where formal religious instruction is minimal, where theological discussions are rare, and yet, somehow, his presence lingers in the atmosphere. A child overhears a grandmother whisper, "Salawat," while cooking, or catches a phrase like, "What would the prophet do?" in passing conversation. These fragments, though small, plant seeds. They create an unforced familiarity, a quiet resonance that lingers in the subconscious long before the mind fully grasps who he was. This phenomenon speaks to something deeper than education. It touches on fitra, the innate human inclination toward recognizing truth and goodness. Even without elaborate teachings, children often sense the prophet's nobility indirectly. They absorb it through the ethics modeled around them: a parent's honesty in business, a neighbor's generosity to the poor, or the way elders speak of justice and mercy. These actions, though not always labeled as sunnah, carry his spirit. They become living echoes of his character, imprinting on young hearts long before formal study begins. Stories, too, have a way of bypassing resistance. A bedtime tale about the prophet's kindness to animals or his patience with enemies lodges in the imagination differently than a lecture might. It's disarming. The moral isn't forced, it's felt. And because children, and even adults, instinctively recoil from heavy-handed preaching, these light touches often sink deeper. The prophet's legacy endures not through grand pronouncements, but through the ordinary moments where his example is quietly mirrored. A shared meal with a stranger, forgiveness after an argument, or the refusal to gossip. This unseen influence also thrives in cultural rituals. The way a family prepares for Ramadan, or the unspoken respect shown when his name is mentioned, creates a gravitational pull toward him. No one explains why. It's simply how things are done. Yet these traditions become a silent curriculum, teaching love for him before the intellect can articulate why. By the time formal learning begins, the heart already knows him, not as a historical figure, but as a gentle, guiding presence. This is the miracle of his ongoing legacy. It doesn't always need fanfare. The prophet, PBUH, reached people through the love he inspired in others, through the moral beauty he embodied, a beauty that still whispers to the fitra, even in the quietest of homes. Sometimes truth arrives not with the force of a thunderclap, but with the quiet clarity of a child's voice. There's profound power in those moments when a simple, unguarded answer cuts through layers of complexity and strikes directly at the heart of a matter. This was the experience of one father whose worldview shifted not through scholarly debate or intellectual argument, but through his child's innocent response to a fundamental question. Children possess a unique ability to bypass the tangled webs of adult reasoning and arrive at uncomplicated truths. Their minds haven't yet been clouded by societal conditioning, political correctness, or the need to conform. When they speak, they often articulate what adults feel but hesitate to say, or reveal truths we've forgotten through years of overcomplication. The father in this story likely spent years building philosophical defenses around his beliefs, constructing elaborate justifications for his worldview. Yet all those mental fortifications crumbled before one pure, straightforward observation from someone who saw the world with undimmed clarity. This phenomenon echoes throughout history's great moments of realization. The child who points out the emperor has no clothes. The student who asks the question the professor never considered. The uneducated believer whose simple faith puts the theologian's doubts to shame. Truth has a way of revealing itself through unexpected messengers when we're humble enough to listen. The Quran itself reminds us that sometimes God raises up the meek to confound the wise, showing that wisdom isn't the exclusive domain of the learned or powerful. What makes these moments so transformative is their spontaneity. The child wasn't trying to teach or persuade, they were simply being honest. And that unaffected honesty carried more weight than any sophisticated argument could. It's a lesson in where we might find guidance if we open ourselves to it, not just in books or lectures, but in everyday interactions, in nature's patterns, and in the uncorrupted perspectives of those who haven't yet learned to obscure truth with layers of pretense. The Father's shaken worldview testifies to an important reality. Sometimes, we don't need more information to find truth, but rather the ability to see familiar things with fresh eyes. Children, in their beautiful simplicity, can give us that gift if we're willing to receive it. And their innocent wisdom serves as a reminder that profound guidance often comes packaged in humility, and that the keys to understanding may lie not in accumulating more knowledge, but in recovering the clarity we once possessed before life made us complicate what was always meant to be simple. The most profound spiritual awakenings often begin not with elaborate arguments or theological treatises, but with a single moment of piercing clarity, a spark that suddenly illuminates what was always there, waiting to be seen. For this father, that spark came in the form of a child's simple answer to a sincere question. In that instant, the name Muhammad, PBUH, ceased being just a historical figure and became a living truth that could not be ignored. There is something deeply significant about how faith enters the heart through the most unassuming doors. While many imagine religious conviction as the result of lengthy study or dramatic revelation, Allah often chooses softer, more intimate means to guide his servants. A child's innocent words carried more weight than any scholarly discourse could, because they bypassed intellectual defenses and spoke directly to the fitra, the innate human disposition toward recognizing truth. The Prophet Muhammad, PBUH, himself said, "Every child is born upon fitra." And in this story, we see that natural purity becoming the means through which an adult heart was opened. This moment mirrors the very essence of the Prophet's PBUH mission. He did not compel people to believe through force or complex philosophy, but through the undeniable beauty of his character and the truth of his message. When the father heard his child speak the Prophet's name with such natural conviction, it was as if he was hearing it for the first time, not as a distant historical figure, but as a living reality whose light still guides souls centuries after his passing. The child, free from the doubts and complications that cloud adult minds, became a mirror reflecting the uncomplicated truth of Islam. This story also reveals an important truth about guidance. It often comes when we approach faith with sincerity rather than skepticism. The father's question was not meant as a challenge, but as a genuine search for understanding. And in response, Allah provided an answer. Through the purest of sources, a child's unspoiled heart. It reminds us that sometimes the most powerful dawah is not given through speeches, but through living the truth so evidently that even a child can articulate it with perfect clarity. In the end, the Father's journey teaches us that faith does not always require elaborate proofs. Sometimes all it takes is one word, spoken with truth, to ignite a transformation. That word, Muhammad, PBUH, became the key that unlocked his heart, proving that the Prophet's light still reaches those who are ready to receive it, even through the smallest and most unexpected of voices. The unbreakable bond, how the Prophet's epicy legacy thrives in young hearts. In an age of endless digital distractions and shifting values, a remarkable phenomenon endures. The pure, unshakable love children instinctively hold for Prophet Muhammad, PBUH. This isn't merely taught, it's awakened. Across Muslim households worldwide, even with minimal formal instruction, young hearts gravitate toward the Prophet's PBUH story with natural fascination. They listen wide-eyed to accounts of his kindness to animals, his fairness to neighbors, and his courage in adversity. Long before they grasp theological concepts, they recognize him as the ultimate hero, not because they were convinced, but because their fitra, innate spiritual intuition, resonates with his radiant character. This enduring connection reveals a profound truth. The prophet's PBUH legacy transcends time because it speaks to universal human longings. Children, unburdened by worldly cynicism, are drawn to his example like flowers turning towards sunlight. They understand on a soul level what many adults complicate, that true greatness lies in compassion, honesty, and selflessness. A child who hears how the prophet mended his own clothes or shared his last dates with the poor doesn't see a distant historical figure, but a living role model. This emotional bond, formed early, becomes an unshakable foundation that often withstands life's later challenges. Modern parents often worry about competing influences, cartoons, social media, peer pressure. Yet time and again, we witness children voluntarily choosing the prophet's PBUH stories over fleeting entertainment. Why? Because his life offers something no fictional superhero can: authentic nobility. When a child learns how he forgave his enemies, protected the weak, or smiled through hardships, they're not just hearing history, they're discovering a moral compass. This explains why young Muslims, even in non-religious environments, often defend his honor with fierce spontaneity. Their hearts instinctively recognize his sacred status. The secret lies in how this legacy is transmitted. It's not forced through dry lectures, but breathed into life through bedtime stories, family traditions, and the unconscious example of adults who love him. A grandmother's tearful dua when mentioning his name, a father's excitement in recounting the Battle of Badr, or a mother's gentle reminder: would the prophet ABUH like this behavior? These moments etch his presence into a child's consciousness more effectively than any textbook. Ultimately, this phenomenon is a living miracle of the prophet's EBUH continuing guidance. As each generation discovers him anew, his light refuses to dim, because truth speaks directly to the uncorrupted heart. In children's unfiltered love for him, we witness the fulfillment of his promise: I am the close friend of the believer. Hadith, across 14 centuries, through changing civilizations, that friendship remains alive, passed like a torch from one generation of young hearts to the next. And so we arrive at the heart of our journey today, a powerful reminder that truth has a way of revealing itself to those who seek it with sincerity. From Joram Van Claveren's courageous transformation to the unshakable love children carry for the prophet, KVEU, we've witnessed how guidance comes in unexpected ways, through intellectual humility, through the innocence of a child's answer, and through the quiet persistence of faith across generations. These stories are not just about individual change. They are proof that Islam's light continues to illuminate hearts, even in an age of doubt and distraction. They remind us that truth doesn't need force. It only needs a willing heart to embrace it. Whether through deep study or a single moment of clarity, the path to Allah remains open to all who approach it with honesty. To everyone who joined us today, thank you. Thank you for your open minds, for your willingness to reflect, and for being part of this important conversation. May these lessons inspire us to approach truth with courage, to nurture love for the Prophet, DVUH, in the next generation, and to always remain humble students of this beautiful deen. Barakallahu faykum, may Allah bless you all. Ameen.